Did you know that the Chinese have their own version of pretty much every English saying? I'm talking about phrases like pot calling the kettle black and Rome wasn't built in a day. And not only that, the Chinese versions also have some really interesting differences and backstories to them. And so I've gone ahead and prepared 12 of the most common and useful ones that will level up your spoken Chinese. But before we get into it, don't forget to download our free PDF in the description below, complete with studio quality, male and female audio files for all of the sayings from this video, plus natural sounding examples, so you can practice offline and actually acquire these new words fully. You'll also gain access to our community, which houses all of our lesson resources, courses, and a ton more cool stuff. So click that link below to get all that cool stuff for free right now. So let's jump into the first expression with the Chinese version of the English phrase, make a mountain out of a molehill. The Chinese take on this is 杯弓蛇影. So 杯 is cup, 弓 is bow, 蛇 is snake, and 影 is shadow. So upon looking at these four characters, cup, bow, snake, shadow, you might think, how the heck does that mean to make a mountain out of a molehill? Well, as with many of these four-character Chinese sayings or idioms called Chengdu, they have very interesting cultural or historical backstories to them. So this one is based off of a story. I don't know if it's true or not. Maybe true, but it's based on a man called Le Guang, and he was holding a party, a wine tasting party or something, and a friend of his at the party, a guest, drank a cup of wine despite the fact that he saw a snake in it. And he drank the wine, and then Le Guang didn't hear from him for a couple of days. And he went to see him at his house. The man was bedridden. And he said, I drank a cup of wine at your party with a snake in it, and that's why I'm sick. And then Le Guang thought a second and said, no, that's actually the bow that was hanging above you at that time, reflecting in your cup. So it's the, not shadow, but reflection of the bow that looks like a snake in your cup. And upon hearing this explanation, the man's illness miraculously disappeared. So it turns out he was being kind of a hypochondriac about it and making a mountain out of a molehill of this small incident. And that's how 杯弓蛇影 came about. So you can feel free to use this one to describe someone who is being a bit paranoid or making a big deal out of something. For example, 自从上次地震后, so since the last earthquake, 大家都有点杯弓蛇影. Everyone's a little bit cup, bow, snake reflection. 一有声音就往外跑. As soon as there's a noise, they just run outside. The next phrase is the Chinese version of the English phrase, a drop in the bucket, meaning something is just insignificant compared to the big picture of things. And the Chinese version is 杯水车薪. So 杯水 means cup, water, or a cup of water. And 车薪 is a cart full. 车 means car, but in this context, it's a cart because it's a very old phrase. Cars weren't invented at the time of this phrase's birth. Xin, this character means firewood or 火柴. So if you can imagine a cart full of firewood on fire, just this huge fire, and then you just throw a cup of water at it. That is 杯水车薪, or a drop in the bucket. It gives the same exact idea. So it can be used in many different contexts. Here's an example in terms of money. So 你的工资, your salary, 对家里的开销, 对家里的开销 is like compared with the expenses of our home, 简直就像 simply is like 杯水车薪, like throwing a cup of water on a cart full of wood on fire. 帮不上大忙, like can't help much. So your salary is just a drop in the bucket when it comes to our family's expenses. It won't be of much help. Now, as with many other phrases on our list today, 杯水车薪 has alternatives, right? You can use other phrases in Chinese to express the same thing. And another one that I've heard relatively often for this phrase is 沧海一粟. A su is like a grain of millet. It's a really, really tiny thing. And 沧海 refers to just the sea, right? So it's like a grain of millet in the sea. Next up, we have the Chinese version of the English phrase, speak of the devil, which is 说曹操,曹操到. So what that means is say the name 曹操, and then 曹操到, he arrives, he just comes. Okay, so this is from a novel, an ancient novel, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is often mistaken for being historically accurate. I don't think it is. But the emperor at the time needed help in a war, and he wrote a letter to Cao Cao to ask for his help, who was a famous general or something, and he was recommended by the emperor's advisors. And as soon as he sent out the letter, it turns out Cao Cao had already sent another general to fight with him and help him out. And since then, it just became part of modern parlance, right? Even though it's 500 years ago, this novel came out. So if you're talking in Chinese about someone and then that person turns up, you say, oh, 说曹操, 曹操到. Funnily enough, there's a Chinese taxi company called Cao Cao, or at least there was last time I checked. Who knows, maybe Uber and Didi kicked them out of the market. But I remember seeing Cao Cao across lots of different taxis in China, and you can imagine why they chose that name, right? Next up, we have when in Rome, do as the Romans, or do as the Romans do. I'm not really sure. But anyway, when in Rome, 入乡随俗. So 入 is enter, 乡 is village or town, 随 is to follow or to adapt to, and 俗 is customs. Right? So when you go into a town, adapt to that town's customs. So here's a quick example sentence. 他总是, he's always 入乡随俗, adapting to new cultures and customs. 很快就融入了新环境. 融入 is another good word that's related to 入乡随俗. So 融 means melt, and 入 means again enter. So it's like melt into. 融入新环境, new environment. I have a really strong memory of 入乡随俗 because I used it once to make a Chinese guy at my gym, the guy that worked behind the counter, belly laugh. I was always pretty bad with money. I'm not so bad now, but I would just spend too much and not look at how much I earned, not save anything. And that's just not the Chinese way. And the Chinese way is they're very careful with money. They save a lot. They're surprised that most Westerners are living paycheck to paycheck and don't really save money. So my wife, very quickly, once we got together, she became the manager of the house finances, right? And one time I'd sent her all my money and I tried to pay for my gym membership and I couldn't. The card was declined. The WeChat didn't have enough money inside. And I just looked at him and was like, I sent all my money to my wife. 入乡随俗, 对吧? Right? I said, got to adapt to local customs, right? And he just cracked up laughing. So I'll just never forget this one. And I do use it at least once or twice a year, I would say. Next up is to judge a book by its cover. Now this one on the surface looks very plain and meat and potatoes. 以貌, according to appearance, 取人, choose people, right? But there's a backstory that comes straight from Confucius. It's a true story where Confucius, because one of his students was very ugly, he said, oh, you don't have any sort of 出息, you don't have any future, And another one of his students spoke very, very well. And he was very handsome and 英俊, right? Which means sort of handsome, tall and strong and just sort of a manly man, right? And so Confucius sort of took a liking to this one. And he was kind of mean to the ugly guy, mean to the point where the ugly guy left. And he actually turned out to be successful. And this less attractive one, apparently the one with no future, turned out to be a super hard worker. And he worked his way up to be a very famous philosopher. Whereas the other guy, although he, because of his good looks and his ability to speak and be very articulate, managed to get his way into a high place in the government or, the emperor's sort of entourage, as it were, he actually got put to death because he argued with someone. So he turned out not to be very smart in the end. And Confucius publicly stated, I've learned a big lesson from this. I will not measure a man by his looks ever again. 你别总是 there's that 总是 again. Don't always, 你别以貌取人. Don't always judge a book by its cover. 这样太肤浅了. 肤浅 means shallow. Next up is the pot calling the kettle black. And in case you are not a native English speaker and you haven't heard about this one, this is where you have a trait and you criticize someone else for having that trait, even though you have it, or vice versa. You say someone doesn't have this trait or doesn't have this achievement of some kind, but you also don't have it. So that is the pot calling the kettle black. And the Chinese version of it is 50步, 50 steps, 笑百步, laughs at 100 steps. And again, this does have a cool story behind it. And this one is about another Chinese philosopher called Mencius. So during a certain battle, one side was clearly victorious in the battle, so the soldiers ran to flee from it. Some ran faster, while some ran slower. When one of the slower soldiers reached 50 paces, he stopped and mocked those who had ran 100. You're all cowards to flee from the battle so quickly. But he was obviously running away too, but just slightly slower. Again, not sure if that story is true or not. Probably isn't, but that's where 50步笑百步 comes from. So for example, 你的成绩, your achievements in study, 比我的还差, are even worse than mine. 你这不是50步笑百步吗? Wouldn't that be pot calling the kettle black? This next one is Rome wasn't built in a day. And this one is kind of funny because up to now we've had lots of sort of interesting backstories that are historical and cultural in nature. This one is very not that. It's just 一口吃不成胖子. You can't become fat eating one mouthful. 一口吃不成, cannot eat and become 胖子, fat person. 要知道, you gotta know, 要知道, 一口吃不成胖子. 做事情还要慢慢来. 慢慢来 is just a really Chinese phrase as well. 慢慢来, slow, slow come. So it's just like, take your time, take it easy. 慢慢来. Next up is where there's a will, there's a way. And this one, now we're getting back to the more professional, cultural backstory ones. This is from an emperor who praised a man, a general, who continued a battle despite having an arrow through his leg the entire time. And he said about him, 有志者是进城. And then after the fact, this phrase came about. I'm not sure if this was actually something the emperor said, his actual words, or if it was words describing the actual incident. But the phrase is this, 有志者是进城. So if you have a willing person, a person with will, a 智者, someone who has a will, 是, the matter or the thing that needs to be accomplished, 进城, 进 is like be, 进 here is like it's gonna happen, and 城 is like to happen, to come about. So if there's someone with a will, then the thing is gonna get done. If there's a will, there's a way. 有志者是进城. Next up, the grass is always greener on the other side. The Chinese version of this, just like all the other ones, is rather different. It's an interesting take on it. 这山, this mountain, 望着那山高, looking at that mountain tall. So it's not saying one mountain looking at the other one. It's saying that mountain looks higher from this mountain. This is from an ancient poem all the way back from the Qing dynasty. Next up is the Chinese version of the English phrase, to have your cake and eat it too. And it's a one from Mengzi or Mencius, the guy I mentioned earlier. And this one's really interesting. So it's 鱼, fish, 与熊掌, and bear paw, 不可, cannot, 兼得, both obtain. Right? So you can't have the bear paw and the fish as well at the same time. Next up is the Chinese version of headless chicken. So you're running around like a headless chicken. And in Chinese, it's very similar. It's a headless fly. Don't know why. 无头苍蝇 or 没头苍蝇. So here's how you would use it. 你冷静一点, calm down. 冷静 就是 calm down. 别像一只没头苍蝇似的. So that's 像 and 似的. Right? That's like a grammatical structure. So don't look like 像 and 似的. It's like they come together. So you put the thing that it looks like in the middle. 像一只没头苍蝇似的. Don't look like or act like a headless fly. Instead of 似的, you could say 一样, right? 像没头苍蝇一样. Right? That's actually probably more casual, more commonly spoken. Next up is gilding the lily. So this one is not particularly common in English, right? I don't certainly use it. I don't think I've ever used it in my entire life, gilding the lily. And in fact, I had to double check what it meant in English, but in Chinese, it's relatively common. It's used quite often. So gilding the lily is where you overdo it, right? So something's already fine, but you just add too many details or work too hard on something. Just go over the top unnecessarily so, expending unnecessary effort to do something. And in Chinese, it is 画蛇添足. 画 to draw or paint, 蛇 snake, 添 to add, 足 feet. So to add extra feet to a drawing of a snake. I'm not sure if this is a true story. This is another one where pretty much like all of these, I'm not sure if they're 100% true or not, but apparently this comes from a story where two men were having a snake drawing contest, and the winner gets to drink a big cup of wine. And one man drew his snake very quickly and was sort of boasting while he waited for the other man to finish his snake, and he started drawing legs on the snake. But technically, because he was drawing legs, his drawing wasn't finished. And the man finished his normal snake without legs painting, and he was the winner. And the man started complaining. He's like, well, have you ever seen a snake with legs? And he started drinking the wine. So that's where 画蛇添足 came from.